Hey guys, it's Matt Lewis, and I just wanted to give a quick tutorial on how I edit the Milky Way. As a bit of a disclaimer, I am copying another video that's a couple years old, but the reason why I'm doing this is because a lot of the techniques and everything that it uses are outdated on the new update of Photoshop. So I'm just going to show you guys how I edit the Milky Way. So the first thing I want to show is this is just a before picture, and then this is the after. So you can see that there's some pretty drastic edits done on it, and the final edit looks pretty decent for what it is, considering that this is only a single shot on the camera. So the first thing you want to do is go to File, Open As, select the image you're wanting to edit, and then select Open As Camera Raw. And then click Open, and it will open up the Camera Raw settings. So the first thing I always do is I turn up the exposure just a bit so we can see what we're working with. Next, I adjust the colors. So I found that around 4500 is a good place to be. And then I adjust to 10, so there's a lot of magenta and red in this. So I'm just going to bring it down to where it helps flatten out the image just a bit. So that looks pretty good right there. Next thing I do is I add a contrast curve in the curve section of this by bringing down the shadows and upping the highlights just a tad bit. So this will help bring out some of the banding of the Milky Way. Next, what I want to do is go ahead and add some noise reduction in the detail section. So just zoom in and then add some noise reduction. So I'll go ahead and put this at about 75% because I don't want some of these smaller details to get lost. And then what we can do is add a lens profile to help get rid of some of the distortion and vignetting that this lens has. So we can go down here to Optics, Use Profile Corrections, click this down arrow, and click Custom, and then put your make and model of your lens. So I'm using a Rokinon 24mm f1.4. And then to correct some of this vignetting in the corners, we can go ahead and bump this up pretty high. So it's still not flat, so the final thing we can do is go down to Effects and then add just a slight bit of vignetting. So that looks pretty decent right there. It's flattened out the image a bunch. And the final thing you can do to this image is if you want to mess around with the clarity, you're more than welcome to. I usually don't because it tends to mess with the foreground a lot. So I'll just add just a tiny bit, and you can also mess around with the vibrance and the saturation. So once you have all that done, just go ahead and click Open, and you can see just between the original image and the edited image that we have so far, there's already a huge drastic change in between the two images. So next, what we want to do with this image is we want to just copy the background image by either clicking Control or Command J, or dragging it down here to the background copy thing. So once we have two copies, we want to separate the foreground from the background. So the way we can do this is we can hit the W button, or we can right click on the wand selection and then click Selection Tool. Then we need to zoom in on our foreground, and we just need to click select the foreground. So if you mess up on something, you can always hit the Alt button and then retrace your steps. So once that's looking pretty decent, the next thing you want to do is just add a curves layer adjustment by clicking the curves layer adjustment. And then what we can do is hit the Alt button, and then when this little arrow pops up in between them, click that, and so that means that this curves adjustment will only affect the foreground. So from here you can just adjust it. So I'm going to just flatten out this a little bit better because there's some difference between the left and the right side of the image. So that already looks a little bit better, just helps flatten it out. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to change just the areas of the Milky Way So the way we can do this is we can go back to our adjustments, add a curves layer adjustment, and then bring up the contrast of it. Bring up the overall brightness, not the contrast. And what we want to do is hit the G button for the paint bucket, make sure black is selected, and paint it all black. So now what we have is a blank canvas that we can draw on. So then we're going to hit the B button for the brush tool, put white back on top, and then we're going to just brush over the areas of the Milky Way that we want to edit. Alright, so that's pretty much all the areas of the Milky Way that we want to edit for this curves adjustment. So then we can go back to this curves adjustment and then add a contrast curve. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But once we have that done, we're going to want to add a Gaussian blur. So just go down to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you want to bump this up to about 350. Go ahead and click OK. And the next thing we want to do is add a contrast curve. So the way I do this is I select this little tool right here, which will allow you to pick points of the Milky Way. And then I find a bright spot on the Milky Way and a dark spot. So right here is a pretty dark spot, and then right here, somewhere in this general range, maybe click on a star, it's a bright spot. And then once we have those 2 points selected, we can just add some contrast between the two. So that's already brought out a lot of the Milky Way. So you can see before that contrast curve, this is what it looked like, and this is what it looks like after. So you can see that it already brought out a lot of the Milky Way. Alright, so once we're done with that curves adjustment, we want to just go ahead and click on this background layer, go up to Filter, click Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And then you want to put this amount up to about 90% and the radius up to about 750. And so what we're going to do with this is we're going to bring out the banding of the Milky Way. So once that's added, go ahead and add a layer mask. Make sure the layer mask is selected. Hit the G button for the bucket tool. Make sure black is selected. Hit black. So now what we have is, again, a blank canvas to paint over. So hit the B button for the brush, switch white back on top, and then we're going to just paint over the areas of the Milky Way that we want the banding to come out. So all the little black areas like this. So once we're done with that, there's some pretty harsh lines in between what we just painted over and what was behind the image. So what we can do is go down to Filter, Blur, and then add a Gaussian blur again. And then this will help smooth out a lot of the lines. So you can see that's our before and this is our after, and it helps bring out a lot of the dusting and banding. So if you think this is too much, we can always turn down the opacity a little bit. So 0 obviously will have no effect, and 100 will have it all the way up. So I usually like to put this anywhere from 50 to 75. So I'll go ahead and put that at about 70%. You can see before and after. So the final thing we can do is we can adjust the banding that happens in the bottom of this. So what we can do is click this top adjustment layer, click a contrast layer again, up the brightness of this, and then we're going to hit the G button once again to paint it black, and then we're going to hit the B button for the brush tool to paint it white, and then we're just going to go over the areas at the bottom of this where there's banding happening. So once that's all brushed out, we can now do adjustments to this to make sure that it is pretty much even. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and add another Gaussian blur. So you should be able to go to Filter, and Gaussian blur should already be at the top. So once we have that, we can just add some contrast or bring down the contrast, whatever you want to do, just to even out the banding a little bit. So it's before and then after. So it kind of got rid of some of the highlights of that. And the final thing we want to do for this image is just ensure that some of this light pollution is gone. So we can click up here where it says RGB and then click on the individual colors that we want to remove. So there's a lot of red in this, so what we want to do is just remove some of this red from it. So that's a lot flatter, but now there's green in it, so just go to green and bring down the greens as well. And you can see that I already flattened out the image a ton. Before and after, before, after. Alright, so there you have it. That is pretty much the final image. You can also do some general just like color adjustments, and you want to add some clarity or whatever else to this image, but this is pretty good in my opinion. It looks decent for just quickly editing it. So just to show you what we started with, this is what we started with and this is what we ended with. And even to compare it to my original edit, it's pretty close to it. The only thing I did differently is when we added the Unsharp mask, I turned down the opacity of it more than I did in this original image. But yeah, if you like this tutorial, just make sure you leave a like down below. If you're not subscribed to me already, go ahead and do that. And if you have any questions or comments about this tutorial, just leave them down below and I will get around to answering them. So until next video, thank you so much for watching.